The rain that night wasn't ordinary rain. It came in waves, beating against the rusted hospital windows like a protest. Inside Ward 6B, the air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and exhaustion. 12-year-old Mira Alayemi lay on the narrow bed, her small chest rising and falling like a candle flame fighting the wind. Her mother sat beside her, one hand gripping the edge of the mattress, the other clutching a crumpled hospital bill. She had been up for 2 nights straight, whispering prayers between sobs. Outside the ward, a flickering bulb blinked like it too was losing strength. Mrs. Alayemi was a woman whose life had been a long conversation with pain. She had buried her husband 4 years ago after a bike accident on 3rd Mainland Bridge. Since then, she'd sold vegetables by the roadside, okra, tomatoes, and pepper, just to keep Mira in school. People often said, "That woman has nothing but faith." They were right. Her slippers were worn, her wrapper faded, her eyes red from crying, her heart was stubborn. And that night, as her daughter gasped softly under the dim fluorescent light, she whispered, "You will not die, my child. Not after everything." Across the room, the nurse on duty, Nurse Tonia, scrolled lazily on her phone. Her shift had dragged longer than she wanted, and she'd been grumbling since evening. The oxygen tank beside Myra's bed had been running low for hours. The machine hissed weakly, signaling its emptiness, but Tonia didn't bother to check. She was tired, angry, and ready to clock out. When Mrs. Alayemi raised her voice, "Nurse, please, the oxygen. It's not working again." The woman hissed without looking up. "Madam, please don't stress me a beg. I've done my part. Another nurse will soon come." Her words struck like a slap. Mrs. Alayemi rose from the metal chair, tears streaking down her face. "Please, she can't breathe. You can see her chest, look. Please help me." But Tonia simply adjusted her cap, picked her bag, and walked out. The sound of her heels echoed down the corridor like a countdown. In the corner of the ward, a young intern doctor named Dara froze. She had witnessed the entire exchange, the mother's cries, the nurse's indifference, the faltering oxygen tank, but fear kept her silent. She was new, still learning the unspoken rules of survival in the hospital system. Don't challenge your seniors. Don't make enemies. Keep your head down. But when Myra's small hand reached out, fingers trembling, searching for air that wasn't there, something inside Dara cracked. She wanted to shout, to call someone to break protocol, but her voice stuck in her throat like swallowed glass. By the time she found courage to move, it was too late. Myra's body had gone still. The monitor beside her bed beeped once, then flatlined. For a moment, the entire room fell silent, except for the rain hammering the windows. Mrs. Alayemi screamed. The sound tore through the ward, cutting through the air like a blade. Dara stumbled backward, hands shaking, heart pounding. The senior doctor rushed in, looked once at the monitor, and quietly covered the child's face with a sheet. "Time of death, 2:47 a.m., he said coldly. "Natural complications from asthma." Natural. That word stung like poison. Dara wanted to speak, to tell him the oxygen tank was empty, to say the nurse had left, but everyone was already walking away. Within minutes, the hospital resumed its quiet hum, like nothing had happened. One more patient gone. One more file closed. Outside, under the weak streetlight, Mrs. Alayemi collapsed beside the rain-soaked bench. She held Myra's slippers to her chest and rocked back and forth. "She was all I had," she whispered to no one. People passed by, pretending not to hear. The world moved on. Inside her small hostel room, Dara sat on her bed, unable to sleep. Her hands trembled as she replayed the night in her head, the gasping child, the begging mother, the careless nurse. She wanted to believe it wasn't her fault, that she was just an intern, that she couldn't have changed the system. But guilt doesn't listen to reason. It grows quietly like rust. By dawn, she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize herself. At the hospital, the report was neatly filed. Patient, Mira Alayemi. Cause of death, natural complications due to asthma. The head nurse signed it without a second glance. By evening, the bed had been cleaned, the sheets replaced, and another sick child lay where Mira once did. Life went on for everyone, except for 2 women. One buried her only child. The other buried her peace. And as night returned, the rain came again, soft this time, almost whispering. It beat gently on the hospital roof, like a memory refusing to die. Because sometimes, the dead don't speak, but truth always finds a way. The days that followed Myra's death felt like slow punishment for Dr. Dara. Every sound in the hospital haunted her, the squeak of wheels on the floor, the hiss of oxygen tanks, even the soft cry of a child in pain. They all echoed that same night when she'd stood frozen, watching life fade from a little girl's lungs. She tried to carry on like everyone else, but guilt has a strange way of whispering when the world goes quiet. At night, when she finally laid her head down, the hum of the ceiling fan became Myra's last breath. Sometimes she'd jolt awake, drenched in sweat, certain she'd heard the child calling her name. She'd sit upright, trembling, whispering into the darkness, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But the room never answered. The hospital had already moved on. Ward 6B was repainted. New children filled the beds. New mothers prayed desperate prayers. Nurse Tonia transferred to another department, bragging that these poor people just overreact. The senior doctors held a small review meeting about the case, but it was more of a cover-up than an investigation. The report stayed the same: natural causes. The file was sealed. Dara sat at the back of that meeting, her hands cold, her pulse loud in her ears. When they asked if anyone had additional comments, her throat tightened. She could have spoken then. She could have told them that the oxygen tank was empty, that the nurse had left, that a child had died not from asthma, but from neglect. But her fear was louder than her conscience. The thought of losing her internship, of being blacklisted, of disappointing her struggling parents back in Succa, it all chained her tongue. So she remained quiet, and that silence became her prison. Meanwhile, Mrs. Alayemi walked through her own kind of darkness. She buried Mira in a small patch of land behind her old church in Ajij, beside a mango tree her daughter used to climb. Every morning, before heading to the market, she would stop there, sometimes to cry, sometimes to talk, sometimes to just sit in silence. Her neighbors said she had gone mad. But pain is a language the world rarely understands. At night, she'd open her old photo album and stare at Myra's school picture. The blue uniform, the shy smile, the tiny missing tooth. "They killed you," she would whisper. "And they think God didn't see." Her small stall at the roadside grew quieter. She stopped singing while selling vegetables. Her body remained alive, but her soul sat permanently by that graveside. And while one woman grieved in silence, the other drowned in guilt. Dara started avoiding the hospital corridors that led to Ward 6B. She skipped lunch breaks just to cry in the bathroom. Sometimes she'd wash her hands repeatedly, as if the water could erase the image of Myra's face. Her colleagues noticed her detachment, but assumed it was internship stress. Only she knew the truth. The guilt was eating her like acid. Then one morning, she opened her locker and found a folded paper that made her blood run cold. On it was a short, shaky line written in blue ink. "You know what happened that night?" There was no name, no signature. Just that sentence. Dara's heart raced. Was it Nurse Tonia? A cleaner? Someone who saw her standing by the bed? From that day, her fear turned into paranoia. She jumped at every knock on her door. She dreamed of Mira walking through the ward in her hospital gown, holding the empty oxygen mask. Weeks later, Dara broke down completely. She went to the chapel inside the hospital one night, long after everyone had left. She knelt on the cold floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "God, I killed her," she cried. "I didn't touch her, but I let her die. Please forgive me." But forgiveness didn't feel enough. She wanted justice, not just for her conscience, but for the child whose voice had been buried under paperwork. That night, as she left the chapel, she saw Mrs. Alayemi walking through the corridor, carrying a small nylon bag, probably coming to beg for the death certificate again. Their eyes met briefly. Dara froze. The mother looked thinner, older, her face hollow. But her eyes, those eyes carried a question that no one else had asked aloud. Why did my daughter die? Dara turned away and ran. But no matter how far she went, that question followed her like a shadow. Hospitals are built to hold secrets. Behind white walls and clean corridors, pain hides in plain sight. But sometimes, guilt leaves cracks no paint can cover. Weeks after Myra's death, Ward 6B began to feel different. Patients whispered about strange sounds at night, the hiss of oxygen tanks, the faint wheeze of a child breathing. The staff laughed it off, but no one liked being on duty there after midnight. It wasn't ghosts that haunted the ward, it was guilt. And guilt has a way of making the air heavy. Nurse Tonia was the first to notice things going wrong, though not in the way people imagined. Her shifts became a parade of small disasters. Medicine missing from trays she swore she arranged, patients complaining of wrong prescriptions she never remembered writing. One afternoon, the head pharmacist caught her pocketing a packet of morphine. She tried to explain, said it was a mistake, but the CCTV told another story. She was suspended immediately. That evening, as she packed her locker, she muttered under her breath, "Since that small girl died, nothing has gone right for me." But deep down, she knew the truth. It wasn't the girl. It was her own carelessness catching up, brick by brick. Elsewhere, the head of the children's ward, Dr. Ocon, began to suffer from severe insomnia. He'd sit in his office at 3 a.m., eyes wide, replaying every decision he made during the investigation. The natural death report he'd signed so casually now read like an accusation each time he looked at it. His health deteriorated, his skin grew pale, his voice shaky. He avoided the ward entirely, preferring to work from the admin block. The nurses whispered that he'd been cursed. But the truth was simpler and crueler. Stress, guilt, and sleeplessness were carving him hollow. Meanwhile, Dr. Dara moved like a ghost among the living. Her once bright eyes had turned dull, her laughter gone. She avoided mirrors, hated silence, and jumped whenever someone called her name. The note she'd received weeks ago still sat in her bag, folded like a wound. She thought about reporting it, but who would she tell? Everyone who mattered was part of the cover-up. One afternoon, she passed by Myra's empty bed, now occupied by another child, and her chest tightened. The new patient, a boy about Myra's age, smiled at her weakly. "Ani doctor, will I get well?" he asked. She froze. The words hit her like thunder. That night, she sat at her desk and wrote a long letter. It wasn't to the hospital board, or her parents, or the press. It was to Mira. "I should have fought for you," she wrote. "They lied and I helped them lie. But I promise, your story won't stay buried forever." Her hand shook as she folded the paper and slipped it into her drawer. For the first time in months, she slept, not peacefully but deeply. The next morning, she woke with a new kind of fire. She went straight to the hospital records office and asked to see the logbook from the night of Myra's death. The clerk frowned. "Why?" he asked. "Case closed." "Because it was never opened properly," she replied. That same day, as Dara began digging through files, news spread that Nurse Tonia had been officially dismissed, and that Dr. Ocon had been rushed to a private hospital after collapsing in his office. The whispers around the ward grew louder. Some said the hospital was cursed. Others said justice had started to move. But Dara knew better. It wasn't a curse. It was truth, and truth, once awake, never goes back to sleep. Outside, the mango tree near Myra's grave swayed gently in the wind. And though no one was there to hear it, a dry leaf broke off and floated to the ground, quietly, deliberately, like a sign that the story wasn't over yet. The hospital moved on as if nothing happened. New nurses were hired, the ward repainted, the files reshuffled. But some stains don't wash off that easily. Dara could feel it in the air, the tension that followed every silence. She'd see an empty bed and remember Myra's small chest fighting for breath. She'd hear the hiss of an oxygen valve and feel her stomach twist. For months she tried to drown her guilt with work, telling herself that speaking out would ruin her career. But the truth has a way of scratching through locked doors. It started with little things, the ward matron suddenly falling ill, the head nurse caught falsifying another patient's record, the whispers among staff about bad luck in the children's section. Dara didn't believe in curses, but she knew one thing for sure. What's hidden always hunts you back. Meanwhile, Mrs. Alayemi had stopped coming to the hospital. Her stall by the roadside became her refuge and her prison. People saw a woman selling vegetables. They didn't see the mother who now counted time by her daughter's absence. But fate, in its quiet timing, began weaving its own plan. One morning, a journalist stopped by her stall to buy tomatoes. She recognized him, the same young reporter who once covered the hospital's donation drive. He noticed the framed photo of a smiling child on the stall table. "That's my daughter," she said softly. "She died at that hospital, and they said it was natural." Something in her tone made the journalist pause. That brief exchange lit the first spark. He began to dig. Within weeks, he found an anonymous message in his inbox. "Ask about the oxygen cylinder on Ward 3. Nothing about that night was natural. No name. But Dara had sent it. The investigation spread fast. One story led to another. Records that were supposed to be misplaced suddenly resurfaced. A whistleblower hinted that hospital funds meant for equipment maintenance were being diverted. Dara's fear turned to resolve. She couldn't undo the past, but she could stop the lie from living longer than Myra's memory. She arranged a meeting with the journalist in a small cafe, her hands trembling as she slid a brown envelope across the table. Inside were photocopies of ward logs, oxygen supply sheets, and her handwritten statement. "If I disappear after this," she said quietly, "make sure they see it." The next morning, headlines screamed, "Negligence or cover-up. Hospital faces probe after child's death." The story went viral, not because people loved tragedy, but because they saw truth fighting its way out. The health board called for an emergency audit. Nurses whispered prayers before every shift. The nurse who had ignored Myra's cries finally confessed, trying to save herself. The hospital director resigned in disgrace. And Mrs. Alayemi, holding her daughter's photo at the court gates, whispered through her tears, "You didn't die for nothing." Dara stood beside her, no longer the timid intern, but a woman who chose conscience over comfort. The wind that day carried a strange calm through the crowd, as if a small, unseen voice had finally been heard. Because sometimes justice doesn't shout. It whispers through guilt, through courage, through the quiet return of truth. God doesn't sleep. Karma is real. When the case broke, the hospital tried to silence it with money and influence. Lawyers appeared out of nowhere, men in fine suits whispering promises of settlement to the grieving mother. But truth had already escaped into the streets. It was on radio talk shows, in WhatsApp groups, in market women's gossip. The nation had found a story that spoke to something deeper than one child's death. It spoke to the silent rot that people had endured for years. Hospitals, power, negligence. All the places where the poor go to seek help and never return the same. The Ministry of Health ordered a full-scale investigation. Files disappeared, computers crashed. And yet, the truth refused to die quietly. Every name connected to that ward began to crumble under the weight of exposure. Dara's testimony became the turning point. She stood before the panel, hands shaking, voice trembling, yet her words cut through every lie. She spoke of that night, of the nurse who left early, of the oxygen cylinder that had run dry, of the signatures forged to cover negligence. Each sentence was a wound reopening, but each tear carried power. The hearing room fell silent. Even those who once mocked her courage lowered their heads. And in that silence, the ghost of Mira seemed to linger, not as a shadow, but as light reclaiming what was stolen. When Dara finished, the chairman of the panel said only one thing. "May this truth remind us that hospitals are built to save lives, not bury mistakes." Within weeks, the chain reaction began. The hospital's license was suspended. The negligent nurse was arrested, and the matron charged with document falsification. The board of directors dissolved under government orders. What once looked untouchable now lay in pieces before public eyes. But the story didn't end there. Donations poured in from across the country to honor Myra's name, enough to build a small community health center in her village. Mrs. Alayemi was appointed its caretaker. On the day of its opening, Dara stood beside her, watching children in white uniforms sing songs of hope. No one announced it, but everyone knew the little girl who died in the ward had birthed a miracle far greater than her pain. As the crowd dispersed, Dara looked up at the sky, soft blue, quiet, forgiving. She whispered, "We did it, Mira." For the first time in months, her chest felt light. Justice hadn't just punished the guilty, it had cleansed something within her too. And Mrs. Alayemi, standing beside her, smiled through tears. "You kept my child alive in the only way that matters," she said. In that moment, two women, one broken by loss, one scarred by guilt, found healing in the same truth. Because in this world, evil may hide behind power and uniforms, but truth has a way of finding its light, even through the cracks of a hospital wall. Years passed. The scandal faded from the news, but its echo lived on. The new health center, named Myra's Place, became a refuge for mothers who once feared hospitals. Children ran across its courtyard, their laughter blending with the rustle of mango trees planted in Myra's memory. Every patient who entered saw a plaque at the entrance, dedicated to Mira Alayemi, the child who taught us that every life counts. Dara visited often quietly. She never sought fame, though people whispered her name with respect. Sometimes, she'd sit beside Mrs. Alayemi under the shade and watch the sunset. Their bond had become something deeper than apology. It was the joining of two broken hearts that refused to stay shattered. The widow, once voiceless, now spoke at community gatherings, urging others to demand better care, to never be silent again. "If one voice can wake a nation," she'd say, "then silence was our real disease." But what made the story live wasn't just the justice or the scandal, it was the change. Hospitals began to reform policies. Nurses got retrained. Patient welfare boards sprang up. Dara went back to school, determined to specialize in pediatric care. Every child she treated became a silent promise to the one she couldn't save. She kept Myra's picture in her pocket, not as a burden, but as a compass. And so the folktale spread from mothers to daughters, from one ward to another. People told it not as gossip, but as warning and hope. The child who died in the ward became a symbol of truth that refuses to be buried. Because in the end, it wasn't just about negligence or punishment, it was about awakening. When the powerful fail the weak, the story says, justice begins in the heart of whoever dares to speak. And that is how the child who died in the ward became more than a tragedy. It became a voice, reminding the world that silence kills faster than sickness. And that sometimes, the smallest lives leave the loudest echoes. The end moral: never be silent in the face of injustice. Because truth may sleep, but it never dies.